Hi everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. I am incredibly blessed to be sitting here with the multi-talented, Grammy award-winning producer, Brandi Carlile, in Nightbird Studios at the Sunset Marquee. Is correct, isn't it?
That's right.
Thank you for coming here and doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this chat.
I suppose what did inspire you to start producing? Others, not yourself, but other people.
Other people. Well, like you, I think I am really prone to the trappings of mega fandom. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I find an artist and I become fascinated with them and their music and what I think they could do to enhance it, or, you know, take a step in their life that maybe they haven't thought of, taking. I get really personally invested in the music that I listen to. And then, I can love like a musician, or I can love music and then like learn that they aren't my kind of guy or my kind of gal, and then just hate their music forever. It's weird. It's like I'm so turned on by the whole package, And when I realized that I could get involved with sculpting some of the music of people that I was going to be listening to and, stalking anyway, I was like, this is a great job. I want to do this job too, And I got involved in it, and I there's no turning back. I love being a producer.
This wasn't a question I wrote down, but what is your process? Are people approaching you, or you're in love with an artist and you start knocking on the door saying, hey, you want to work together?
There's definitely been a bit of both.
Yeah?
Yeah, I would say that the latter has been my more popular approach, where I'm actually approaching people and saying, I have a really good idea. I have a really good set of ideas. Or have you ever thought about this? Or would you be interested in, experimenting in this way? The only person that's sort of like chosen me would probably be Brandi Clark. You know what I mean? Based on my work. I think that's fair enough. I think you should establish a track record before you expect people to come knock on your door. And maybe she started to see my work and thought she wanted to, get involved in that way.
This is very early for me to ask this question, but I wonder, you're a really strong character as an artist.
Yeah.
Typically speaking, we're fans of music, don't usually make good producers.
Really?
Usually the producers are like the drummer or the bass player.
Sure.
They have a role in a band. And I'm going to throw you this very early on, but what do you think gives you that edge?
Well, I think you're right. And, I'm glad I didn't know that up until this moment. Because I think because the first two producers I worked with were such strong characters. Like, they're just icons, like you could trace the silhouette of T-Bone Burnett or Rick Rubin and show it to me in black and white, and I would know who they were, or even like say someone like Don Was. Like, these people have an aesthetic, a presence, and a character. And so I didn't really think of a producer as more of an unassuming presence. When I went into that role, I thought about T-Bone and Rick, I think.
Yeah, but they're not artists in quite the same way that you are.
I know, yeah. I'm glad I didn't consider that. But they are strong characters.
Right.
And in a formidable way and a supportive way.
Given your background, given that you've worked with, so I think of Rick, because, we would do pre-production stuff with Rick at the old studio where you and I were talking about earlier. Rick definitely leaves a lot of that sort of sonic stuff up to engineers, doesn't he? He likes to hire Jim Scott, somebody who's absolutely incredible, and let them make a lot of those kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
For you, did you work like that, or do you love to get in there and kind of sculpt a sound as well? What's your sort of process?
Well, I have technical ears, but I don't have the technical language or skill set. And I have an enormous amount of respect and affection for engineers. I've had some of my best moments in the studio and in life with empathic engineers. The ones that have, honored me enough to work with me, even though I do lack a technical language, have just taught me so much. And they're as important to the record as any other element, It's like, I play guitar too, but I don't play guitar on every record, And I think that an engineer brings so much to the project, not just technically, but musically and psychologically too. And so I've worked with some of the coolest fucking guys and gals, just amazing people.
You produced While I'm Living with Shooter.
With Shooter.
And of course you won a Grammy for that, which is absolutely incredible.
So stinking proud of that for so many reasons.
So talking about what you bring, what do you feel like in that situation that was your strength that you brought to the project?
I think it's like my strength as a producer is that I have an unwavering gauge for authenticity, that I am macro, that I see the project beyond the studio and before it. Psychologically, I'm willing to get on whatever wavelength and into whatever dimension that the artist is in and work with those tools to build the spaceship instead of kind of bringing my own formula into the room and, insisting that we snap everyone to that grid. So those three things together, I think, make me sound maybe a bit abstract, but the process gets less abstract when I get into a room with a guy like Shooter or an engineer like David Spring or Brandon Bell, We immediately notice each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we acquiesce and, find ways to mold to each other.
Now, as a singer and, of course, a songwriter, that's a massive strength. You feel like you can communicate with the artist in a unique way, having actually the empathy with them.
Yeah, well, and you'd think it's a strength, but sometimes actually I've learned that it's not very helpful for me to sing at people in the studio, you know what I mean? For me to say, you do it like this, like that's so incredibly frustrating for other people and odd, like there's a longer way to get there. You don't want to create a template for an artist to mimic something that you're doing artistically. And they don't want to do it either. It's not great. So I've learned a lot of these lessons in real time, actually.
But emotionally, is that a strength, you think, where you can read that singer?
Yeah. Emotionally, it is a strength because it's a bit like having like a built-in lie detector test, and understanding affectation, but also understanding that you can't take affectation away from an artist in a violent way. It has to be, it's a process of helping an artist feel comfortable enough to shed the affectation. And if they don't, let them keep it. Let them keep it until they're ready.
In the cases of obviously Tanya, Brandi, and Tish Melton, we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah.
What's the process individually with those artists? Is there lots of things that you share from one artist to another in the process of getting their artistic vision out of them? Or are you finding that, well, I suppose one of the things I always think about in my own experiences, do you meet a lot with them beforehand? Do you love doing pre-production? Do you get there with an acoustic guitar and sit down with them for days on end before going anywhere near the studio? Sometimes the demos are phenomenal. For each of those artists, what was sort of the process?
Well, it's really it's a little bit different every time. That's going to sound like a cop-out, but a lot of the pre-production and the decision to go and do this work with this particular artist is really done in advance on my own. Like where I'm asking myself an honest question, do you want to work with this artist because you're a fan and you love the music and you think you can help enhance it, or because you think they haven't met their full potential? And there's a fine line between those two things. One concept works and the other one doesn't. And so I really make sure I'm as far away from they haven't met their potential line as I can be.
Interesting.
So I really only work with artists that I go into the process already not just respecting, but being quite enamored by. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's a little bit more conducive to making a truly great and self-revealing album for them than me believing I know better than they do for their next steps, because I don't think that's my strength. I think there's some people that is their strength, and they come in and they say, this is a lump of clay. I know what it's going to look like, when it's over. I don't really do that, but I do try to enhance where I think it's already going. And then each artist has this set of shiny new tools that I get to use. Like, for instance, Brandi Clark's shiny tools that I don't have are the ability to write a 3.5-minute song without any ego, to understand the art of synthesis, knowing what the important things are and how to distill that instead of believing that what I have to say is so important that everything should be 6.5 minutes long, That's where I need help from a producer. So I got to use the tools of her egoless and intuitive songwriting to help her make an amazing album, and it's great when you get to use other people's tools for a while.
I can't help but think that option one gives you option two anyway.
What do you mean?
Well, you're saying that you're not going in there thinking that you know better and you're going to reinvent the wheel and make them into this.
Yeah.
I feel like don't you really kind of achieve that anyway, because you're helping to inspire them to better themselves by getting in there and working with them on a level that only really another artist can do.
Yeah. Well, there's always a teaspoon of that. There's always like a teaspoon of this artist hasn't reached their full potential. But it's not coming from a place of critique. It's coming from a place of hope.
Right.
You know, and I think an artist can really sense it. They can sniff it out. And I know because I've been the artist, you know, on both sides of those equations. And I've felt more enhanced by the latter. So that's sort of like my personal perspective is I know I'll be a more effective producer if I am a fan of that artist, like a fan of them, not just what they haven't done yet, but who they are now.
Do you feel like as an artist yourself, because you've achieved that, which you've achieved a very uncompromising way of getting there? You really have. You've got somewhere very uncompromisingly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, you know, when you were doing those demos at the studio and everything, it was all like, I'm sure there was lots of people running around going, well, you know, if we took her out and dropped her into these people and brought in these players and co-wrote with that person and stuff, and you've never done that. You've been uncompromising. And
I'm a very uncompromising person.
Yeah.
Which is weird because...
But you've achieved as a result, which is unbelievably unusual in our business.
Yeah, and I'm amiable, but people allowed me to hold on to myself.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm talking about is like, I just actually saw T-Bone Burnett again a couple of months ago at Joni Mitchell's house. We had a dinner and we were hanging out. And we were laughing and drinking wine, and I was sort of like, I was retroactively making fun of myself and some of the things I said and believed back in my 20s when we worked together. And I remember him I was kind of sort of apologizing. And he said, God, you were so punky. You were just so punky, you know? And I really didn't feel punky. Like, I felt like this cardigan-wearing, folk-singing lesbian from Seattle. I felt like it's a total nerd. But I guess I just really insisted on holding on to myself. And then, you know, people like T-Bone Burnett, who probably had a whole other vision of how I could have achieved greatness on albums like The Story or Give Up the Ghost, at some point, they had to go, okay, hold on to yourself, you know? And they did. That is a real talent in production, when you know best, allowing another path to be taken, knowing that this artist may achieve shedding this affectation without you on the next album, you know? But just knowing that you're a part of the journey is, I think, reward enough.
I feel like that whole explanation there pretty much sums up all the rest of the questions. Because you achieved it that way, that sort of unrelenting pursuit of what you wanted, being able to bring that to an artist is huge.
Yeah, it is huge.
And it's what every artist really wants.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love that we live in an era now where that's becoming important again.
Yeah. Oh, it really is. I've noticed that too. I mean, there is some really interesting lo-fi and independent music being made. And you can see the preliminary beginnings of these foundation builders. And I personally can't wait for those artists to meet that producer that's going to help bring them into themselves. Because I actually also don't really believe that we achieve it alone. Mm-hmm. I really believe in the role of a producer.
I feel like the technology has forced that upon us, because when we used to go in and make records as kids, just getting things to be tight was work in itself. Punch in and fix.
With our Tascams and exactly.
And now with all of this stuff, that's the easy thing to do. We can make everybody in tune and in time. But garnering incredible performances and it is a whole different skill set, which cannot be achieved by any DAW ever.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to watch, and it's still happening. Those charismatic, once-in-a-lifetime performances are still happening in studios all over the place for the people that know how to recognize them and facilitate them.
You're here at the right time.
I think so, yeah. You know, I've always felt like that. I've always felt like I'm alive in the exact right time for me to be alive, you know. I feel really lucky for so many reasons.
I think this is probably part and parcel of the question that got us here, but you said you prefer to receive guitar vocal memos from artists rather than elaborate demos.
I mean, speaking in construction terms, I think it's a little more functional to not have to do a teardown.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's like to build from scratch is just so much freer, you know, I remember when I used to have to make demos that I thought were really evolved to get the record label to let me record the song or give me the money to go into the studio or say, you're ready, okay, this collection of songs is going to work for us. And I remember sitting there and thinking, well, they're not going to understand this as a chorus unless I get 3-part harmony into this son of a bitch. And then, it's like, I swear to God, this thing needs to be 3 BPMs faster, or they're not going to think it's up-tempo enough, and they're not going to give us the money. And, that way of thinking was just so formulaic that it actually, I think, kind of whittled away at my craft in those moments, And it actually wasn't until I met Dave Cobb that the first time I sent him a demo with 3-part harmony and a chorus, or a demo that was obviously tempo mapped in one way or another, even though I don't even record records that way. He said, no, just go into voice memos on your phone and play it with your guitar and send it to me. Just the verse and the chorus, too. I don't need the whole thing. And I remember thinking, I'm insulted. And then getting into the studio and having so much more fun reconstructing the mystery of what that song was meant to be in the moment of the studio, which was the only moment that really mattered. Like, I really believe, and this is the other thing, is that I really believe songs have like moments, like they have a golden hour. And it comes right after you learn the song and right before you've got a hold of it. Mm-hmm. And if that happens on your demo, it happened on your demo. And I actually think that's what demoitis is. And I've had it. I've had it too many times to count. So I know, like, I'll go back to my early demos and I'll hear the golden hour on, one of my favorite songs. And I'll go, God, I wish I'd been in the studio.
Do you find you're recording demos to the highest quality you can, just in case?
Now?
Yeah.
No, I record my own demos on a voice memo on my phone. Oh, wow. And I won't even do it with 2 people playing. It's either be one instrument and a vocal, just so that you can hear the melody and basic idea of the structure with a lot of open-heartedness to tear it all up.
I'm just wondering if you're sitting there and you're listening to that, mono recording thinking, if only I had a separate guitar and vocal, that would have been...
The whole time. Yeah. But that's the trapping of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like knowing that I won't yet. It'll happen in the studio and it'll be bliss.
So I'm just going to fanboy on this. So we talked off camera about Queen being a mutual favorite band. You just touched on who I think is maybe the greatest songwriter of all time, and that's Joni Mitchell. Mm. How did that even just come about?
By the way, your taste. It's like, no, she is. Yeah, she is.
Hajira is like...
That's my favorite, too. That's my all-time favorite.
Oh, my hairs are standing on it.
Yeah.
Coyote.
And it's her favorite. That's really
is it really?
Something. Yeah, that's her favorite as well. Yeah, big deal.
Oh, that's so good.
Because she does not let herself off the hook, and she really quite likes that album.
She just got the balance right, didn't she? She has. Well, she got it right millions of times. Sorry, but just enough jazz in there, enough folk in there, enough everything. Mm. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, and it was so transitional. Like, I feel like Joni's albums, I've written about them before in terms of them being color wheels because she's a visual artist. She's such a painter. And, as colors start to fade into one another, you can see the intent. You can see the next color that's coming by the way that the one before it is starting to change or lighten. And each one of her albums has a couple of revealing moments about what the next album's going to be like. And you can always feel the last song that she landed on, And I think that, Hajira is one of the most consistent and transitional albums that she's ever had. It's also it smells and feels like a place and a time instead of, a hodgepodge of experiences crammed together over the course of a year. It feels like she went in there and did that thing in 4 days with the same...
Did she do it in 4 days?
Just feels like it. Yeah. She probably didn't, It probably was 2 weeks or a month like we all are used to working within now, but it feels like that, Some Elton John albums have that feel as well. Those in-residence studios are really interesting. Shangri-La is interesting that way. Bear Creek is interesting that way. If you can live there, that's cool.
Residential studios, you feel like that's an advantage to just live your album?
It certainly is a texture that you can feel in retrospect. And I can feel it in some of the great 70s albums that I love, and I've strived to mimic it. I mean, there have been full albums where I've started the album out going to, the bedding shop and buying beds and sheets and pillows for everybody and making sure that we're sleeping at the recording studio. And those ones really have a feel when you're like making eggs in the morning and then you start the record and, everybody's like drunk at the end of the night in a hot tub. Like you really can hear that. And you can hear the pranks that got pulled. You can hear the conversations. You can hear the fights of living together.
Music from a Big Pink seems to come to mind.
Yeah.
When you're talking about this, just that sort of feeling, you know. Yeah. I mean, you work with certain engineers. You actually just mentioned it earlier. David Sprang, Brandon Bell, and mixers Trina. I'm a huge fan. I've been trying to.
Have you ever met her?
I've never met her.
We have to. If there's one thing that comes from today, we have to facilitate that.
That would be amazing.
She could take every piece of equipment in this room, in all of these rooms, apart, down to the screws, and reassemble everything herself. She's an actual genius with her soldering iron and all of her tools and her encyclopedic knowledge. She's a real presence and has taught me so much in so many ways, even outside of the studio. You know, it's like Trina Shoemaker has like said things to me in passing that have wound up being entire subject matter for important songs, you know. For the first line of The Mother was a song from By the Way I Forgive You of mine, is Welcome to the End of Being Alone Inside Your Mind. And Trina Shoemaker said that to me on the day that my first child was born, and it caused me to write one of my favorite songs. That's what a great presence in the studio can be too. She's also like, talk about a residential studio person. If it's a residential studio or it's not a residential studio, she's going to live there with the gear. She's going to put a pillow and a blanket down, and that's where she's going to sleep. I mean, she's told me on numerous occasions, I don't leave the gear. I don't leave the gear till the record's done. That sounds fantastical, but that's really how she is. Like, it's bizarre.
There's also that classic 60s engineer that was actually an engineer.
Yeah, oh sure, yeah. She's really reverent of that.
Yeah.
While also being really technologically up to date and even futuristic and intuitive in knowing where it's all going.
So you co-wrote Breakfast in Birmingham. Oh, sorry, Birmingham.
Yeah.
I'm still too English, Birmingham. That's a heck of some co-writers there.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. How did that transpire?
Well, I love Bernie Taupin. Bernie Taupin is my hero. He's been probably my all-time favorite lyricist since I was 11 years old, because the first time I ever read lyrics and they came off a page and I realized that songs were written by people, I didn't really understand. I knew people sang songs and I sang songs, you know. It was Skyline Pigeon, Bernie Taupin. I mean, that is a beautiful lyric, an esoteric lyric. And I, started writing him letters. And
when was this?
Oh my God, I've written him letters many times throughout my life. I probably started writing him letters when I was 15, 16.
Did he ever respond back in those days?
I doubt he ever got him. I didn't know where to send him, you know. We didn't even have Google. We couldn't figure out what's Bernie Taupin's mailbox number. No, I just started writing him letters. But when I did figure out how to get letters to him, he did respond. We had a fast friendship based on mutual respect. And I told him that my dream was to write music to his lyrics someday. And he said, well, I'll send you a couple things. And so he sent me 2 songs, Brushfire and The Gift. And I wrote music to them, loved it. Then he sent me Breakfast in Birmingham and he said, how about this one for Tanny Tucker? And as soon as he got to the line about the bacon, I just knew that was gonna sound so great and that she was really gonna relate to that. Since I was 11, Those guys have been my all-time greatest heroes.
What was the album when you were a kid?
Okay, well, it started actually because they were only ones allowed to check out from the King County Library, Here and There, which is a live album, and Tumbleweed Connection. First song was Skyline Pigeon. But the first time someone handed me an Elton John album and said, here, Merry Christmas, was Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And I didn't have any way to listen to it, but I would go to school with the cassette packaging, and I'd sit on the bus and unfold it all, and just read the lyrics and look at the pictures and read the lyrics and look at the pictures and read the lyrics and look at the pictures. And I started writing songs immediately that year based on that. And it wasn't a year later, but I got a keyboard, Yamaha keyboard from Toys R Us, and started writing songs because I wasn't complex enough to play Elton songs, you know. I could hit the little synthesizer button and I could sustain and sing over them and do things like Sweet Painted Lady and Harmony and Roy Rogers and stuff like that. And that took me off doing music. It was before that, it was really just classic country and Western music, which I felt detached from as a creator. I always felt like a singer because I did that music at a place called the Northwest Grand Ole Opry, and we were all just mimicking the Opry. In fact, I found a photo recently standing in front of a wall with a giant mural of the Ryman Auditorium painted on it. And having been to the Ryman so many times now in my adult life, thinking, God, that used to be my dream, just to travel to Nashville and see that place. Wednesday nights, we'd have our rehearsal. We'd pick our artists we wanted to mimic. And then Friday and Saturday were the shows. And that started for me when I was like 8 years old. So I found Elton John, and I realized songs don't come from nowhere. They come from us, and they have to do with experiences that we really had in life. And it all got very intense for me then. And I got a biography by a guy called Philip Norman, Elton John biography.
Philip Norman's a great writer.
That's
amazing writer.
Without that biography, my life would be totally different because through that book, that's how I discovered Queen and David Bowie and George Michael and U2 and the Beatles.
We haven't touched on George Michael. We could do an hour on that as well.
Oh, don't even get me started.
I get kind of teary-eyed.
Oh, so does my wife. That was the worst Christmas.
Yeah.
That was the worst. But without Elton John as a gateway drug, without that book, without those albums, I have no idea what kind of artist I would be, but I would be very, very different. And I kind of like found my people when I found the British gays.
I love. Is your wife as big a fan as I absolutely love Listen Without Prejudice.
My wife is a mega fan of Listen Without Prejudice.
Yeah.
She knows every word. She loves George Michael. Even last night, we were at dinner and the waiter came over and took our order and he left. She goes, "Oh, we had hair like George. She had hair like George. She looked just like George Michael." He's a waiter in LA. He's not George Michael. But she just loves George Michael. And I have always loved George Michael.
Yeah. Or talking about faith, an obvious record to mention, that moment in Father Figure, the bridge, when the those harmonies come in.
Yeah.
Still is top 10 greatest
full body goosebumps
in history of music. Just that 5 seconds of those harmonies. And then you get older and you start finding out, so he wrote it, he played the bass on it. It was just like,
We didn't even know what we had.
No.
Did you see that I got to sing George's part at Dodger Stadium with Elton on Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me?
Amazing.
Oh my God, I used to sing that song, the George part, the Elton part, the George part, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Elton John, da-da-da-da-da, I can't find. Like, that song is just written on my soul like a tattoo, and I got to sing it at Dodger Stadium, and I was really thinking about George.
For me, Somebody to Love at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert.
Oh.
Ridiculous. Have you seen, I can't remember which Queen show it is, but it's when they're doing Save Me. You know, Save Me is the song that Brian wrote about feeling like a failure as a father. They went off on the road and they became hugely successful, and it broke up his marriage and his kids. And so he wrote this song. Save Me, obviously. I think it's the Montreal concert where he sits at the piano because he wrote it.
Okay.
So he's playing, Freddie's singing, started also well, and then when it goes, save me, it comes in, Brian stands up while holding his hand on the keyboard like the sustain, throws the guitar back over, plays the first chord to come in, and Freddie slides onto the chair and keeps playing the piano. And they're playing in front of like 200,000 people.
God.
And there's no person playing piano at the side of the stage. They've just worked it out as a 4-piece. I'll finish the piano and put the sustain pedal on, and you come in, and it was, sorry.
Man, that's crazy.
It's just moments like that where you just remember that it can be done.
Oh, it can be done.
It can be done.
This is interesting. I saw, maybe in like the early aughts, I saw Muse play a 600-seat club in Seattle called Numos as a 3-piece, and they were doing that shit. Instruments behind their backs, playing other ones, taking over for the others as they're moving around in this orchestrated way. I thought the floor was going to come out.
And they were kids in those days, weren't they?
Yeah, they were wildly talented. Yeah. So incredible. That album, Absolution, was like, that was a big influence on me early on.
I remember going to whatever the first LA show was in those days. I don't even remember. Was it Troubadour? Doesn't everybody sort of play the Troubadour early on?
Like Elton.
Yeah.
It is kind of like that underplay tour that every mega band does in the beginning. It's like, if you get to catch that, you see the sweet spot in that trajectory. I saw a couple of people like that. Seattle was a good stop. In the late 90s and the early aughts, Seattle was the spot. You know, we had like a music row in Seattle when I was young. There was like, you could walk up to a record label and drop off your demo. We had a major presence, you know, and tons of recording studios that are still there, just sitting there, smelling like the 90s. It just occurred to me that when you mentioned Swing House and you said, did Rick put you there, that you meant Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
But who brought me to LA the first time was Rick Parashar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So Rick Parashar lived in Seattle, introduced me to the Twins.
Wow.
And made all of my early demos and work, and was like probably one of my biggest mentors while I was a teenager. Took me all over the place, put me on an airplane for the first time.
Incredible.
So when you said Rick,
that's who you thought of.
That's who I thought you meant.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't until many years later that I played for Rick Rubin at Swing House. But that was a pivotal moment in my career, playing for Rick Rubin.
I remember it. Remember when it happened?
Yeah.
That was amazing. Did you do it on the blue stage? Or did you do it on the black stage?
I can't remember. It was a small room, and there were steps, like bleacher-type seats instead of... And the stage was on the ground level. Mm-hmm. And I remember Rick Rubin sitting cross-legged like a guru, like on the second or third step.
It was one of the green stages. We had 2 green stages that were smaller. And one of them had the steps like that.
It was small. Okay, that's the one. Mm-hmm. And I played my first song. And after being turned down by every record label you could think of, between SIR and other Swing House showcases, Rick Rubin said, play that again. Play that one again. And I played it again. And he said, play that again. Mm-hmm. And we played this song 3 times, and we knew we had a record deal. And it was just mega. And I remember exactly that era, because Johnny Cash was still alive, and he was still working on the American recordings. Damien Rice was like the kid everybody was talking about, that had come to LA, played a concert the night before to the Viper Room, to silent, standing kids. And that was a cool era, cool time to be in LA.
Yeah, I remember it incredibly well. Sometimes it feels like a long time ago, and then sometimes it just feels like the other day. How does it feel when you have those kinds of moments, when you're just reminded of being a kid, and you're like, that sort of pinched me?
Just unwaveringly surreal. Like it never, ever wears off. It doesn't even really calm down. It stays really intense and really nostalgic. And, you know, I just think we all have this like kid inside of us that is just jumping up and down. And sometimes we have to ask her or him to have a seat and calm down, you know, while we do our job. But like, that kid is really got a loud voice inside of me, and never, ever, ever lets me forget how fucking strange it is that the things that are happening to me are happening. You know, it's right there on the surface all the time.
I think we didn't quite get into the weeds of how did you end up working with Joni? What was the process there?
How did I end up working with Joni? Well, Joni is so mystical, and she is so in charge of and in control of, in some ways, her own destiny, that I have not really seen manifested in another person. You know, and I talked to Russ Kunkel about this early on in my days, having met Joni, and he said, remember, Joni Mitchell always has a plan. And I don't even know if, like, Joni knows that she has a plan, but you do feel guided by her. You're never guiding Joni Mitchell. That's not going to happen. But you always feel guided in some mystical way by Joni and whatever it is that some ethereal part of her intends to happen next. I wound up having dinner with Joni Mitchell because in a freak incident, she met and enjoyed the company of my wife, probably because she's a South Londoner, as you mentioned.
South, yeah.
And I got invited as like a third wheel to this dinner, and Joni started talking about her painting, that she isn't at all missing doing music, but that she recognizes that there's this part of her house that wants music in it, and there's instruments there, and would I be interested in a jam? Not only was I interested in a jam, but we started the jams, and I started curating the jams over at Joni's house and bringing in friends and artists that I thought she would enjoy for one reason or another. They wound up being these amazing communal nights of like fun, but a lot of growth started to happen in terms of Joni's recovery from her aneurysm, things were physically happening musically and vocally every single time that really felt like you were witnessing a miracle. And those things are simultaneously happening with her body because Joni wakes up every day and works on her recovery until she falls asleep. And it's like unbelievably inspiring. And as her musicality started to sort of casually develop around these jams, she started to get more and more interested abstractly in, maybe doing that outside of the living room. And Newport Folk Festival rolled around. And I thought, oh man, how cool would it be to get Joni back on stage at Newport Folk Festival. And we started talking about it sort of casually. And she was like, she could take it or leave it, the idea of maybe going and playing on stage. And I didn't sense any trepidation or nervousness from Joni or anything. It's just that she wasn't like, it wasn't an absolute. And a lot of the singing that we had done up to that point was singing more like singing along. There's a couple songs where everybody would just sit and stare at Joni and listen to her sing them, like Summertime or Both Sides Now. A lot of it was stuff where I was singing, another guest was singing, we had all learned her songs and we were kind of starting to tribute her in these things. It started out, we'd play other songs for Joni and maybe one of her songs would come into an evening because I think everybody was pretty scared to sing Joni in front of Joni. But everybody got braver and braver and she would sing along a little bit. And it was like, this is really special. This is really iconic that she's like generous enough to let us sing these songs in front of her and that she'll throw down a harmony now and then, So Newport was this idea where we'll do this. We'll sit around on couches and we'll sort of tribute Joni to Joni. And she's going to have a microphone for the first time because none of these jams had microphones. So she'll either sing along or she won't, just like at the house. But it's going to be magical and there's not going to be anybody there that's not going to love what happens. But what did happen was that she really sang along like no one had ever heard before. And she was doing improv stuff and call and answer and pulling out harmonies no one ever had known before or knew how to navigate. And she was just getting this sly thrill from watching all of us react to this shit in real time and scrambled to like know what to do. And we just happened to get lucky enough to capture that moment in time, And that's what happened from the time I met Joni to now, is that I've been guided by an undeniable plan on Joni's part to return to art in whatever way she wants to.
Whenever I've seen her interviewed, she's very contained and yet you read her lyrics and you're just like, there's so much going on up there. So when you were saying Russ Kunkel was saying it, she's always got a plan. I can imagine it feels like that when you're around somebody that there's just so much brilliance coming out.
Yeah. I think if you said that to her, I think if you said, oh gosh, Joni, somebody said you always have a plan, she probably would not think that's true. I think it's more like that her presence on this earth is just so strong that what manifests around her is just kind of affected by the gravity of Joni Mitchell, So whether she's like systemically planning something or not, the particles are gathering around her for things to happen based on her energy. And I don't know if she could know that and still have it.
Right, I understand.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what Russ meant by that. Because Joni's not sitting at home going, what's my next move? Like, at all.
Yeah. But, we were talking about High Zero. I mean, it's so timeless.
I know. It really is. I love Amelia.
Oh, Amelia. It was just a false alarm. Yeah, it's just... It hits on every level because the songs are incredible. The lyrics are some of my favorite songs ever. Her rhymes within rhymes. She can write a line which traditionally would rhyme on the end of a line, and there's 3 points in the line that will rhyme with the next line, but yet it never sounds contrived.
Nope, it never sounds contrived.
I don't know how she does that.
No, I don't know how she does it either. And then every time you listen to it, you discover something new.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even like, I think if somebody separated just her breathing would be rhythmically beautiful because it is so intentional. I mean, when I covered the Blue album at Disney Hall and Carnegie Hall, I realized that I couldn't do it without studying the breathing, the breaths, where they were. They were just as rehearsed as the lyrics or when and how to get into falsetto, because they were just so surgical. And there was no other way to get through those lines without knowing where to breathe. There are wrong places to breathe in Joni Mitchell songs, where it's not humanly possible to finish it unless you do some weird alien, breath technique.
I did a video on Blue and did some research about it, and finding out, James Taylor, she and Carole King at the same time were making seminal albums, quarter of a mile away from each other, or wandering down to each other's studio, putting an acoustic guitar or mandolin or piano on each other's records and doing harmonies.
And like sharing a piano with some tension.
Yeah.
Right? Of like trying to get to this piano and who was going to get to it and and I think it was like Joni would always start late or something like that. And so she got the piano a little less often.
Because you've often mentioned, the crack in your voice on the story.
Oh, yeah.
But you've never really elaborated on it much.
I've never been able to make it happen since. And on that day, I did it like 3 times in a row.
Really?
Yeah. It might have just been some weird anatomical thing, but there was definitely an emotional thing happening too. I was feeling punky, as T-Bone put it. The first time I did it, I almost burst out laughing because I thought it was such an ugly mistake.
Really?
Yeah. And it was T-Bone that came running into the ISOL booth and flung the door open and said, "Do that again. If you can do that again, do it again." And, and I was like, oh, that was good,
But you do love it and you appreciate it.
I love it now and I appreciate it. And I wish I could do it again.
Yep.
You know who could do it? Sheryl Crow could do it. She knows how to create that sort of squeak bridge moment in a vocal. Like I can yodel, but it's like a cross between a yodel and a scream. It's like a scream yodel or a distortion.
Scrodal.
Yeah, it's a scrodal.
A dream. I don't know if this is true, but somebody once told me that Elvis Costello doesn't like the fact that he can't sing H's properly.
Really?
And somebody told me that, and whether that's true or not, but that thing that he does, I mean, that's Elvis Costello. It's like,
yeah, we developed these little like ticks,
Yeah.
T-Bone hated this really repetitive crack in my voice at the time, which I still have. But I use it less often, I think it was a crutch back then for one reason or another, but boy, it started driving him crazy by the end of the record. And it was a part of my personality at the time,
When you went into the Newport experience, were you planning for it to be an album? Were you planning for it to be?
No way. I was not planning for it to be an album. I didn't even know if it would happen. I did not know if it would happen until it was happening. And then when it was happening, it was euphoric, but I was still felt under so much pressure and stress that I just didn't know what would happen until it was like over, I didn't know if it would go forward for so many reasons. And then once it was going forward, there was like cops on the side of the stage that were going to unplug the PA if we went over time. And so I had all these like timing constraints, and like I knew if we went over by 1 minute, it was going to cost us like $15,000. And then if we went another 5 minutes, it was going to cost us this. And then in 1 second over, they were going to unplug, and like, you're getting close to the time when you like see the cops or whatever. And I mean, I was just sitting there dying inside, just feeling a lot of pressure from it all. And when it was over, the feeling of, oh my God, it just happened, that like, I just watched 20,000 people cry their eyes out to both sides now. Like there was just this fracture in the world that I felt opened up, where everybody decided to be just fucking cool to each other for 1 minute. And that for some reason, Joni at Newport created this vortex, for people. At the time when it was happening, I wasn't fully conscious of it. I was still a little bit too nervous. So was I planning for it to be an album? Like, absolutely not. But the mics were there and they're set up, and they always are, because I record every show I ever play.
Was there much post-production that went into it?
Yeah. There was a lot of post-production that went into it because, well, the first thing I wanted was for Joni to hear it properly, because I really wanted her to hear what she'd just done. Like, I knew she'd remember it, but I really wanted her to hear it. So Brandon and I mixed Summertime and both sides now. And as I got into the mixes with Brandon, we were able to create moments of bravery that we couldn't really pull off in real life, because so much of what was happening was unexpected and improvisational, that things that were done off mic, tentatively, we were able to bring them into reality. Moments of singing that, in essence, may have been really loud in the presence of the show because the front of house person was prepared for Lucius or Taylor or me to sing. Those things could now be tucked behind Joni's radically interesting timing and harmony that she pulled out for the first time in that moment. So we were able to create moments of confidence that we didn't have on stage. So we were reacting and we were doing things quietly, slightly off mic, and then pulling those to the forefront for the album so that people could hear what was really happening and what those reactions were musically like. I loved that about the post-production of Newport. Got some do-overs, actually. When we brought it to Joni and played it for her, then she got involved in the post-production, and that was freaking inspiring. Because I'd never seen that side of Joni Mitchell. I have this one photo of the kind of post-production, 3 or 4 post-production meetings that we had with Joni after the fact that, like, I will always cherish, where she's like, I'm sitting at, the table with a notepad, and I'm obviously very anxious and excited for her to hear something. And she is reacting with her finger up and like she's pointing at the speaker, and she's telling me, like, in that spot right there, this, can you go in there and can you do this and do that? And it was like, it's so cool because she's got this furrowed brow and her hand is up and she's reacting passionately to her own music. And I was there and I got to be given orders, by a master. And, it's a photograph of the fact that really happened, that I got sent back to the drawing board by Joni Mitchell. I mean, how important, right?
Now I'm thinking of Joni, I'm thinking, when you listen to Hajira, not to harp on about it again, it is completely driven by her vocal and guitar playing, everything. Whether it's Jarko playing a bass line or not, he is picking up her rhythm, her feel, and everything. So I presume you were a fan as a child.
Of Joni Mitchell?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, you weren't?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't a fan of Joni Mitchell till I was 30.
Oh, wow.
And then I spiraled into a Joni Mitchell obsession and made up for lost time.
Well, the little thing I was putting together in my mind then doesn't make sense.
No.
Because what I was going to say from a production standpoint, that you love getting vocal acoustic demos, vocal electric demos. If you think about Joni and that album and pretty much everything she does, it's so driven from her. It makes perfect sense that you'd want to hear demos in a similar way because you might want to adopt that same kind of feel. But maybe it's just that you're running parallel paths and you appreciate and love the same things and boom, suddenly you connect.
Part of the intention around bringing the jam together, the people that make up the jam, are incredibly important because what each of these artists is, like, they're all sort of a piece of or an era even of Joni Mitchell, right? So, like, you've got Blake Mills, who's like nailed down this tone and the Parker Fly, and he understands the equipment, and he is like a complete Joni geek on that era and those guitar tones that we're talking about right now. Whereas at the time, Joni wasn't playing guitar. So here comes Blake, and he's doing Joni, like, meticulously. You got Jess and Holly, who have studied Joni's propensity for recording her own background vocals. And when those are in unison, when they aren't in unison, what they do, how she integrates these strange phrasings and rhythms and call and answer type stuff vocally, They've studied it, they love it, they're major Laurel Canyon buffs. So they show up and there's a piece of Joni getting added back into the Joni. Then you got Taylor Goldsmith, who is another Laurel Canyon boy. He's so studied. He knows all the guitar parts. He knows exactly what James and Stephen played on Blue. And so everybody shows up with a piece of Joni in their backpack, And it's like in those moments in that jam, these are all just little reflections of light that suddenly are being reflected back at her and onto her. And she's reacting to it like she is playing because we're doing her. And so the jam, which Joni wouldn't really even like me to analyze as much as I do, is a communal party. It's just a love bomb, but it's a Joni Mitchell love bomb. And it's multi-generational, and it's wild, and I think it's revolutionary. I don't think anybody's done anything like it before. And it's it's a congregation and it's an effort on many people's part. Celise is the kind of electric lead guitar player, jam member, she does Sex Kills and Help Me, and she's really aware of Joni's love of, Jimi Hendrix and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and pretty amazing.
When you're producing, are you sitting there trying to encourage something that, because you used right at the beginning, I think you used the word integrity. I think you used honesty. Is that something that's right at the top of your list when it comes to working with an artist?
Yeah.
Beyond like, oh my God, that song's great, I love the voice.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Because if you're writing with integrity, then that artist is going to radiate authenticity.
Mm-hmm. That was the word.
When they sing the song, young people kind of radiate an accidental authenticity that can be really intoxicating and really interesting if we don't judge it. And that's the lesson that I'm learning from Tish Melton. She's like, her own authenticity. It's amazing. I think back to songs I wrote when I was 16 or 17 years old, like Turpentine or My Song, and now I feel like, they sound like a bit aimless. Your teenage poetry just following you around into your 40s is like not the greatest feeling at times. But then I think about like her songwriting, the things that she's writing about. She's not pretending to be older than she is. She's not pretending to be going through a divorce or, be head over heels in love with someone, because she's not. She's writing about fleeting moments with as much intensity and as much integrity that I would write about, like, losing my parents. Do you know what I mean? At this point in my life. She's got a song called Long Drive about how when she went on her first solo drive in a car, when she got her driver's license, she burst into tears at the first red light because she realized it meant she was really not a kid anymore.
That's a lot of self-awareness.
You can't write a song like that. Yeah. I can't write a song like that. We're not 17. Yeah. And the fact that she is, that's blistering authenticity. And, I get to be in the same room with it sometimes. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I want to make a conscious effort to work with people of all different ages and stages in their life, walks of life, because their authenticity looks very, very, very different from mine. It's not a one-size-fits-all word.
And it sounds like a learning experience as well for you.
Hugely, yeah. Yeah, and also like a little bit of grace for myself about what I used to write about and how it may seem fleeting to me now, but it's actually a big deal to cry at your first red light when you realize that your parents aren't driving you anymore. That's a metaphor that you could take forward, well into middle age and have it still be impactful.
That's the kind of thing that I look back on and shed a tear for, because now I figured it out. But to have the awareness at the time, that's huge.
Yeah.
Really huge.
And to be supported in having the awareness at the time. That's my job.
Incredible. So what's next for you?
I am getting ready to take some time off touring. I'm going to make another album for this duo called the Sister Strings.
Sister Strings.
Sister Strings, a cello player and violin player who both sing and write. They're really, really unique, incredible instrumentalists and incredible vocalists and evolving songwriters. So we're in this kind of like long pre-production process of deciding who we all are together and what this album's going to be like.
Thank you ever so much. Absolutely amazing.
Absolutely my pleasure. I loved it.
Great. Well, stay tuned. I'm going to try and do some more of these. Any comments and questions, please leave them down below. And we'll obviously put links to everything we're talking about. Eric there will go through and link to everything, won't you, Eric?
Oh, I will.
That's the plan.
Thanks, everyone. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios.